Are central banks trapped? Absolutely they are. Central banks are caught between a rock and a hard place. On the one side, inflation is rising and there needs to be a certain level of talk about tapering the monetary policy and reducing the repurchases, even increasing rates. On the other hand, the problem is that virtually no government can take an increase in rates, and that the extremely artificially depressed yields of bonds, of sovereign bonds, would immediately rise the moment that tapering is in effect. Central banks tend to believe that it's all a communication thing and that they need to gather the support of large investment firms to convey to the market that tapering is not a negative, that there is ample opportunity, etc., in order to calm markets against the likelihood of a so-called taper tantrum. The problem is that what central banks are not taking into account is the elevated level of risk that has been taken under the reality that investors understand that central banks simply cannot tolerate a tapering process. As we saw in 2018, a very moderate tapering process led to a correction in markets which made the Federal Reserve change at 180 degrees its stance. Therefore, there is the risk of markets behaving in a normal way, which is a correction, a significant correction, is extremely high. And at the same time, governments cannot tolerate higher bond yields because of the elevated levels of deficits. So, on the one hand, central banks cannot taper, and on the other hand, because inflation is rising, they need to talk about tapering. This creates a perverse effect. It creates the understanding from the market that it is not going to happen, and therefore communication and policy fail to achieve what they're looking for, which is to stabilize. And we're seeing how the economy is getting more exposed to risk, not less exposed to risk, and governments are taking more risk, and at the same time markets remain excessively optimistic.